I, Tantus Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome! It is time to continue my expose on the history of Magic the Gathering. I'm going to continue on with the third set in the Mirage block, Weatherlight. Now, Weatherlight was released on June 6th of 1997. It had 197 cards. And as I said, it was the third set in the Mirage block. The most important theme that it sort of put forth was graveyard use and graveyard control, though it did continue with the keywords like a cumulative upkeep, flanking, and phasing. Other than being the third set in the Mirage block, it was actually the beginning of the Weatherlight saga, the most important storyline that actually has ever come out in Magic the Gathering history. It's a storyline which lasted up until 2001, so 4 years of sets worth of storyline. Now, the symbol on the cards represents the Thran Tome, which is one of the cards from the actual set. Now, the Thran Tome, in the storyline of the card, was a artifact tome that, should anybody, whoever reads it, will read something different than whoever else reads it. So each person gets different information from the Thran Tome. It's actually an important part of the legacy, which I will talk about when I talk about the story for this. Now, as the previous sets, there was 15 cards to a pack, and the booster packs had Steel Golem on it. So all the booster packs had the same artwork on. And this was Magic's first set that actually had a very cohesive storyline to it. Previously, a lot of sets had alluded to an overarching storyline and sort of built, you could sort of piece them together. But this is the first one that actually had a huge storyline interwoven into it, focusing on the narrative and archetypal characters that it sort of build into it. So there were important characters thrown throughout it that would form into this crew. And this actually proved to be a both popularity-wise and commercially huge success. So Weatherlight proved to be a great success for Magic. Now, what happens in the Weatherlight cycle actually sets the stage for the Wrath cycle, the next cycle in the blocks after this one. Now, the storyline takes place that it's thousands of years after Urza and Mishra had reopened the portal for Phyrexia, which is something that happened during the Brothers' War, that now in Phyrexia, Yawgmoth, the Dark Lord of it, is ready to invade Dominia again. And so what we're focusing on is the Legacy. The Legacy is this group of artifacts that, when assembled, effectively create this doomsday weapon that can be used to defeat the Dark Forces planning on invading Dominia. In the center of this is the skyship Weatherlight, which is the focal point of the Legacy. So it's this skyship that's part of the Legacy in and of itself, but it is also being used to assemble the Legacy. And it's the storyline of this crew attempting to travel around to various places, assembling the Legacy in hopes of defending Dominia against this oncoming threat. Now, there's an entire cast of characters which are very interesting, but some of them, for example, are Gerald Caption, who is the sort of leader of the group who's been put in charge of it because of circumstances. There's Squee, the Goblin Cabin Boy, and Targoth, the Minotaur, that's sort of the muscle of the group. And there's a lot of other crew members. But the basic storyline is that Captain Sisay gets kidnapped and taken to the plane of Wrath by Vul, or as he's now known, Volrath. Vul was the blood brother of Gerald, and now he's become Volrath, this character which is the second in command to Yawgmoth. So you can see how this is interesting storyline going on, that now Gerald has to face against his former blood brother, now second command of the enemies, in hopes of once again reuniting with their captain, who's an integral part of rebuilding the Legacy in order to save the world. Now, the Magic novel Wrath and Storm actually covers the events of this entire Weatherlight saga here, the entire set of Weatherlight. Now, Weatherlight was designed separately than the previous two, Mirage and Visions, this block, but elements of those blocks were included in the set to make sure that it felt like it was an extension of it, that it just wasn't something tacked on to the end, even though it was, again, designed separately. Now, Graveyard ended up being a major theme, Graveyard mechanics, I should say, ended up being a major theme within Weatherlight, that various mechanics involving the Graveyard became very important. Now, this was the last set to have banding. After this, the keyword and the ability of banding was effectively discarded and no longer in use. Now, there was two major important themes. When I'm talking about the Graveyard themes, two of them actually relate to it. First one was Graveyard Order Matters, that there were things related to the order of cards within the Graveyard that made a difference in them. There also one was Sacrifice Buyout. What this would mean is a creature would have some form of ability that you could either choose to pay some kind of cost for that ability or sacrifice the whatever's activating the ability to use it. So you can choose to pay some kind of cost in order to keep it around and possibly pay the ability again, or sacrifice it in order to use the ability. Now, there were 3 cycles of cards in Weatherlight. The first one was sacrificial auras, or sacrificial enchant creatures. Effectively, these were aura enchantments that when you'd play them, they gave an ability, or you could sacrifice them for an increased ability temporarily. The second cycle was a cycle of cumulative upkeep cards. These cycle of cumulative upkeeps had unique abilities that if you didn't pay their mana cost, something would trigger. So effectively, instead of just they are out and there and you pay the cost to keep them out, something triggers in relation to you not paying. And the last cycle was a special cycle of rare cards that gave greater an effect if you were at a disadvantage. So if there was something bad going on, a disadvantage, you would get a greater effect than if you were not. There were also 2 functional reprints from the Portal set in this one. So let's talk about some of the cards from this set. First off, there was the Gemstone Mine. It came into play with 3 counters on it. You could tap and remove a counter to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. When it's out of counters, you sacrifice the land. It's a good way to get quickly out some different colored mana. There's the Null Rod. The Null Rod, the activated abilities of artifacts cannot be activated. That's an interesting way of saying it. So if any artifact that has an ability that you would pay or tap to activate, it could not be used. There's the Lotus Veil. When it came into play, you had to sacrifice 2 untapped lands or sacrifice it right away. But it could be tapped for 3 mana of any color of your choice. So it was an interesting land that you could get rid of a couple lands for effectively 3 mana of any color. But again, you need lands to sacrifice in the first place. Now there's the Redwood Treefolk. It's a 3/6 for 4 colors and 1 green. Now why am I mentioning this? It's an upgrade card. It's one of the first upgrade from original cards. I could compare this to the one I'm showing you here. Iron Root Treefolk, which is the same mana cost for a 3/5. So it's an upgrade to a 3/6 from a 3/5 for the same mana cost. It's all around better. Cloud Djinn. It's the functional bird plant of Cloud Dragon from Portal. 5/4 flyer, can only block creatures with flying. Peacekeeper. You had to pay 1 colorless and 1 white during your upkeep to keep it out, but creatures couldn't attack. As simple as that. I actually have this in one of my decks. It's actually pretty decent in that deck. Urborg Justice. Target opponent sacrifices the creature for each creature that was put into your graveyard from play this turn. So if you have a whole lot of creatures that died this turn, you play Urborg Justice, your opponent also then all of a sudden loses a lot of creatures. And it's very good in a sacrificial type deck where you might have been sacrificing those creatures for something anyway. Ancestral Memories. It has a cumulative upkeep of 1 colorless. When it comes to play, you look at the top 10 cards of your library. You can exile any you want, put the rest back in any order. That's it. That's all you do. But when you stop paying Ancestral Memory, you shuffle your library. So as long as you're paying that, you get the cards that you just chose from. So you look at those top 10 cards, put them in an order, choose the ones you want, get rid of a few that you're like, I don't really need those. And then you just keep drawing them until you choose to stop paying it, and it goes away. There's Angelic Renewal. When a creature would be put into the graveyard from the battlefield, you can sacrifice Angelic Renewal to return that creature to the battlefield. So you trade the enchantment for the creature. There's Aura of Silence. Enchantments and artifacts cost 2 more to play, or you could sacrifice it to destroy an enchantment or artifact. Barrow Ghoul. It's a 4/4. During the beginning of your upkeep, you either sacrifice it or exile the top card of your graveyard. Bone Dancer. So Bone Dancer is a 2/2, but when you attack someone and it's unblocked, you can choose to deal no combat damage, and instead take the top creature card from an opponent's graveyard and put it into play under your control. So if you get Bone Dancer attacking someone unblocked, it steals a creature from that person's graveyard. There's Rogue Elephant. It's a 3/3 that costs you 1 green mana, but you have to sacrifice a forest when it comes into play. So it's very good for very quick green decks. There's Thran Tome, which I mentioned previously. 5 mana tap, reveal the top 3 cards of your library. An opponent chooses one of them and puts it in your graveyard, and then you draw 2. So effectively, you look at the top 3 cards, your opponent gets rid of one of them, and you get the other 2. There's Bubble Matrix. Prevent all damage that will be dealt to creatures. There's Buried Alive. Search your library for 3 creature cards and put them in your graveyard. This is actually really great for graveyard resurrection decks where you might need to get creatures into your graveyard. There's Familiar Ground. Creatures you control can't be blocked by more than 1 creature. I actually have a combination with this for Goblin Drums from an earlier set where your creatures have to be blocked by more than 1 creature. So now they have to be blocked by more than 1 creature, and they can't be blocked by more than 1 creature. They can't be blocked. There's Goblin Bomb. During your upkeep, you flip a coin. If you win the coin flip, you put a fuse counter on it. If you failed it, you remove a fuse counter. If it gets 5 fuse counters on it, you can remove them, sacrifice this enchantment, and deal 20 damage to a player. The times it actually has occurred, rare. Orcish Settlers, 1/1 for X, and then X again, and 1 red. You can destroy X lands. So if you had 3 mana open, you could pay 1/1 in it red, and you could destroy X lands. You'd have to sacrifice Orcish Settlers, of course, to do this. It's part of the cost to use it. But you pay all this mana, you sacrifice Orcish Settlers, and you destroy lands. There's Spinning Darkness. You can exile 3 black cards from your graveyard instead of paying its mana cost. It does 3 damage to a creature, and you gain 3 life. So that's it for today. I went over Weatherlight. I talked about the history of it, the storyline behind it, and the storyline it began to forge. The Weatherlight saga. That this was the beginning of an ongoing storyline that lasted Magic years. I also went over some interesting cards from the set, and some ones that actually still have some use. If you have any questions, comments, anything you want to say, anything you think left out, please leave it in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. It shows your support for the channel, the Empire, and the work I do. And until the next time, I bid you farewell.